Hello and welcome back. This time we are going to discuss how to write Chapter 5 of your research paper, and the title is Summary of Findings, Conclusion, and Recommendation. But before we start, please support the channel by clicking subscribe and the notification button. Okay, so Chapter 5 is composed of four parts: the introductory statement, the summary findings, the conclusion, and the recommendation. Starting with the introductory statement, there are 3 points to remember. First one is, this part of the research contains a short introductory statement that presents the content of the chapter. Second, refrain from using citations that would derail the focus of your chapter. And as much as possible, use a maximum of 2 paragraphs in writing your introduction. So based on these points given to you, the introductory statement should be short, direct, and should reflect the content of this part of your research. I will be presenting an example so you can visualize what this looks like when you write this in your research paper. Okay, so here is an example of an introductory statement for Chapter 5. So the title is Summary of Findings, Conclusion, and Recommendation. And this is what the introductory statement looks like. So the introductory statement technically is composed of 2 paragraphs, and it discusses directly the content of this chapter. So based on this example, you will be able to reflect on how you should construct your introductory statement when you write your own research paper. Okay, the next part of your research is the summary of findings. So there are 3 points to remember in order to write this part of your research. First one is, this part should be anchored on the SOP or statement of the problem of your research. Second, in writing this part, present the actual SOP or statement of the problem and then immediately present the findings of your study using the data and evidences found from the previous chapter of your study. And then, technically, this is usually written by presenting the SOP in bold letters and then present the findings separated by a single space. Again, I will be giving you an example on the next slide for you to be able to visualize on how to write the summary of findings. Okay, so this is the example of the summary of findings. So you have the title on top and then an example of how you should present your summary of findings. There's a short introductory statement immediately after the title, which is summary of findings. And then number 1, which is written in bold, is the actual SOP lifted from chapter 1. So the SOP is supposed to be in question form and in bold letters. And then immediately after the SOP is the summary of findings anchored or based from the previous chapter, which is chapter 4. And before we continue, I would like to thank Miss Erica Lynn O. de los Ama because we are using her research as an example for this part of our discussion. Okay, the next part of chapter 5 is conclusion. So again, there are 3 points to remember when writing your conclusion. And the first one is, these are realizations anchored on your research finding. So that was the previous part of your research. You formulate your conclusion based on what you discovered in your research findings. Second, these should be presented as the synthesis of your key points. So this is already a summary of all the analysis that you did in the previous chapter of your research. And the third point is, the hypothesis can be answered in this part of your research. So if you conducted an experimental research and there are hypotheses that were presented during that part of your chapter, they can now be answered on this part of your research. Okay, so we are going to look at the example of the research conclusion. So you start with the title, and again, you follow with the introductory statement or a short introductory statement, and then you present your conclusions based on the findings of your research. Okay, and last but not the least, the recommendation part of chapter 5. So how do you write your recommendations? Again, we have 3 points. Number 1, recommendations should be based on the conclusion of the study, which is again the previous part of your research. Second, recommendatory and not demanding tone should be used or utilized in the presentation of this part of your research. Third, there are two elements required in presenting the recommendation. The first one is the action being recommended, which should be clear and concise. The second is the entity, the institution, the organization, or individual tasked to implement the action or the recommendation. Now, let us look at the example of the recommendations made in this research paper. So again, after the title, you present a short introductory statement, and then you present your recommendations. So we can see that the words used here to recommend the action are the word should, and then the action is specifically, clearly, and concisely presented. What type of action should be done, and then who should implement the action being recommended. Hello, and we have reached the end of the discussion for this video. And again, I would like to ask you to please subscribe to this channel and click the notification button. And thank you, and hope to see you on the next video. And if you have any questions regarding research writing, please do not hesitate to write your question in the comment box below so I can get back to you and answer your questions and inquiries immediately. Bye!